What was happening in the 80s in the art scene in New York at the time? Who were some of the players?
Well, everything was happening in New York at that time, and most notably, Andy Warhol was at his peak, and Basquiat was one of his proteges, and he was making a name for himself as one of the foremost artists of the time. And so that whole movement was coming around. Later in the 80s, people were madly buying art. It was just a very good time for the art world. So even graffiti artists from the streets were brought into galleries and given large shows and selling every canvas in the gallery. And the last few years of the 80s, Artlife was the most popular publication being sold at the Guggenheim Museum bookstore in Soho in New York City. So the 80s were very good for art and for Artlife in New York because we were being sold in all the major museum bookstores in the city. And that is primarily where the circulation was, outside of other private collections around the country and the Getty here in California, Detroit, Brooklyn museums, places like that, and private collections, of course. But the thing that made it work all these years was that every artist who contributed a page to any issue received one of the finished bound issues in return for their work. So among the artists, it was a conceptual exchange and an exchange of their work every month. So the artists would follow each other's lives and follow each other's progress and follow each other's evolution through the pages of Artlife every month. And it existed on many different levels for many different people. So for the artists, it was a conceptual exchange, an exchange of work and ideas. For the patrons, it was something that they happily added to their collections in the libraries and archives. And for other people, it was something they had never seen before. And they would find it at the Guggenheim or the Museum of Modern Art or the Whitney or who knows where. And it was a very exciting time.
Very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Since this was a cultural and conceptual exchange of ideas, how did it transcend to other countries?
Well, the visual image traveled very easily. And so the language was totally not a factor with the artwork that was being sent back and forth.
How so?
Well, because since the image transcends language, a visual image could be sent to any country and another artist could interpret it without the use of language or words, just using the visual language which we all have in common. So that's what made it easy for all these people in European countries to send things and essentially collaborate with each other. And there would always be a narrative going on in every issue. And of course, none of these people ever knew each other. But when I put their artworks next to each other, more often than not, it would seem as if they had discussed the concept earlier and had some kind of a collaboration going, which was quite fascinating.
It's very fascinating. Were you ever careful of who you sent this out to? Did you have a target market?
Well, since the numbers were so small, it became an absolute necessity to be careful who it was sent to, because when I designed the whole concept, it was designed as something that would be kept. And
Preserved.
absolutely.
Yes.
So it was never intended as a throwaway, or it was never intended as something that would be discarded. So I had to be careful to send it to people that would treat it with that amount of respect. And so museums and libraries and archives seem to be the most obvious places for it to go. And the most we ever did any one month were 200, since they were all hand-assembled, handmade, hand-bound, and the works were hand-done. So half of those issues would go to subscribers and to the artists in each issue. So that only left the other half to be sold to pay for the next month's issues. So since I had so few left to distribute, I was able to get them into the best museums in New York City for distribution. And it didn't bother me at all to have the numbers so small when they were in the absolute best places that they could possibly go.
Absolutely. Now, am I safe to say that this has never been done before and will probably never be done again?
It's a very safe statement, but I do have to tell a little anecdote about Man Ray, who was one of my favorite artists and photographers. He came out to Los Angeles from New York as a fashion photographer, probably in the 30s. And he had come from New York, and he had associated with people like Marcel Duchamp and, you know, people on the highest order of the art world. And he had also been involved in many avant-garde movements. So he actually started an art journal in Los Angeles while he was a fashion photographer in Hollywood. And he did one issue of it, and it was the first, last, and only issue to ever be done. And he said trying to do something like that in California was like trying to grow lilies in the desert. So
he basically dared you to do it.
So after that, there was a very long lapse, since the primary industry out here is making movies. The static artwork is hard pressed to compete with a motion picture. So the movie industry is still the largest thing out here, but now there is more and more acceptance of the static image and contemporary art. So sporadically, little journals came and went. You know, they would last for a year or two, and people would do one a year, two a year, three a year, four a year, and for a year or two, and then they would disappear forever. But Artlife was the only one to start on a monthly basis and be consistent for any length of time and never miss a deadline for 25 years. So that is why Harvard and Yale and the Getty have all the issues archived permanently in their collections.
It's great. How do you think it influenced the people that were involved?
Well, one time somebody pointed out to me that it had influences on people that I could never even imagine. And over the years, I found that to be true, because I would hear little snippets of histories and stories from different people involved. But I can safely say that in the pages of Artlife, every human condition has been documented, because every artist and poet would document their lives in their pages from one month to the other. So there were relationships coming and going, there were marriages, births, deaths, infant mortalities, parental deaths, families coming together, falling apart. The original Gulf War came and went in 1990. We originally bombed Baghdad in December of 1990. That Gulf War, the first war in Iraq, so that was when that all happened. And that influenced the economy, that influenced the artists, that influenced Artlife. It caused a recession. It sent many artists into a recession they never survived from. And so it all had a big effect on what was going into the pages of Artlife and what kind of response it was getting. And so it's all documented, it's all in there. So it really is, without exaggeration, a 25-year time capsule of the events of the day, and on a more personal level, the events in the lives of all the people who were involved be they visual artists or poets or whatever their medium happened to be, since everything was documented.